So Lauren, this is just a reminder to go ahead and start recording the webinar, and we'll be sending everybody a copy of the PowerPoint slides as well. So let me begin by welcoming you to this American Library Association webinar, Library Programs and Partnerships in the 2020 Census. And I'm Karen Brown, and I will be moderating the webinar, and I'm fortunate to be working with ALA on some of its census awareness and engagement activities. And my other hat, though, is as a faculty member at the School of Information Studies at Dominican University, which is just outside of Chicago. I want to introduce the other presenters we have for today's webinar, a really stellar group of presenters, and give you a snapshot of what we'll cover in the program. First, Beth Lynk, who is the Census Council Campaign Director at the Leadership Council on Civil and Human Rights, will talk about the importance of the census to civil rights and local communities and how libraries can collaborate with local Get Out the Count efforts. Next, Cathy Hartz, who is manager of the National Partnership Program with the Census Bureau, is going to cover some of the ins and outs of working with census partnership specialists and provide us with just general guidelines about being a census partner. A number of libraries have been engaged in offering outreach and collaborative programs and services related to the census, and we're fortunate to have librarians and staffs of 4 organizations who are going to talk about what they're doing. In Phoenix, the iCount 2020 and the Phoenix Public Library collaborated on a unique program that Cathy Pearson, the Youth Services Manager at Phoenix Public Library's Burton Bar Central Library, and Albert Santana, the City of Phoenix's Census Director, will tell us about that program. And many college and university libraries have also been active with awareness and engagement activities around the 2020 census. And Jeff Corrigan, who is the Senior Assistant Librarian at California State University-Monterey, is going to talk about some of their collaborations. And then we also are going to hear about some of the initiatives at Gail Borden Public Library District, which is in Elgin, Illinois, and we're going to be hearing about some of their outreach programs and numerous partnerships from Denise Raleigh, who is the Division Chief of Public Relations and Communications at Gail Borden. And I think we're also going to have some time for your questions, so we have set aside some time at the end of the webinar for that. But if questions come up during the webinar, both Lauren and I are going to be moderating the chat box, so feel free to include a chat comment or question if you have it. I want to begin by spending just a few minutes providing an overview of the 2020 census, kind of as a framework for the presentations that are going to follow. So a count of all residents, U.S. residents, is required every 10 years by the U.S. Constitution. The census form asks questions about all the people who live and sleep in a household most of the time, including babies and anyone who has no permanent place to stay and is staying in that household as of April 1st, 2020. The goal of the census is to count every person once and only once and in the right place. And the census counts results are used for multiple purposes, including determining how and where more than $1.5 trillion in government funding is allocated for services and programs that communities and institutions rely on. Census data is also used to determine representation in Congress and the Electoral College, as well as in state and local government. And then census data is being used by agencies and organizations of all types to help with policy making and to plan programs and services. Census data, for example, is used for schools, and this includes preschool, K through 12, and higher education. It's used for health centers, road, housing assistance, other vital programs. Ones that are very familiar to many of us are the National School Lunch Program, Medicare, SNAP, and then of course IMLS funding in the form of state grants. So one of the topics that you'll hear us talk about today is reaching hard to count populations. And historically, some groups have been undercounted. And these groups are considered hard to count because the Census Bureau has found it difficult to maybe interview, to locate, to contact, or to persuade them to participate in the census count. And on this slide, you see some of the hard to count populations listed. So how does the census work? How does it unfold? What are some key dates? On March 12th, the Census Bureau will mail an invitation letter to almost all households in the United States with instructions for responding to the census. And in some rural, some very remote areas, the census letter invitation is actually hand delivered. As you may have heard, the 2020 census is the first census to include and actually encourage an online response, a self-response online form, completing one. But the letter that individuals will get will also provide instructions for completing the census questionnaire. It can be completed by phone and by mail in multiple languages. The Census Bureau uses some other methods for counting individuals that are in what are called group living quarters, such as military barracks or prisons or college dorms. There's also a 24/7, 3-day night period when census workers and some of their partners try and reach people experiencing homelessness, going to such places as shelters, soup kitchens, outdoor locations. April 1st is designated as official census day. Individuals can certainly complete the census form before April 1, but they should include everyone who will be what's considered the term usual resident of their household on April 1st. And then in May, the Census Bureau begins to follow up with households that did not respond to the census letter and reminders and visit households to collect responses in person. It's anticipated for kind of a time period for libraries, particularly keep in mind is from March 12th to April 12th is a key period when libraries are likely to receive the most questions and should be ready to assist individuals who come into the library. It's very important that people know that completing the census form takes about 10 minutes and that the information that is collected is kept confidential. So that's really just a snapshot of the census and how it unfolds. I want to make sure that you're aware of some resources. And again, you're going to get a set of these PowerPoint slides. But ALA has a webpage dedicated to the 2020 census with numerous resources. There's a library guide to the 2020 census, which includes basic information, several 2-page tip sheets on such topics as census hiring opportunities, reaching families with young children, and preparing your library for the census. Additional tip sheets will be added as they're created. There are links to webinars of 3 previous recordings of 3 previous webinars and downloadable graphics and other materials. At both the ALA Midwinter and the Public Library Association conferences, there will be programs that focus specifically on libraries and the 2020 census. And the Census Bureau is also going to have a booth in the exhibit hall at these conferences that you can visit and ask questions. And then want to note that you should be sure to check out the Census Bureau's website for information and resources, including marketing materials that are available in multiple languages. So let's go ahead and hear from some of the presenters. Beth, if you could tell us about the focus of the Census Counts campaign and some of the activities that are ongoing, and then just let me know when I need to move to a new slide.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on this webinar and in this important discussion. My name is Beth Lynk. I am the Census Counts Campaign Director at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. The Leadership Conference is a coalition of over 200 civil and human rights organizations that work across the country to ensure that we build an America as good as its ideals. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. And what we have been engaging in census outreach for decades, and the reason that we take and see the census is so important and so critical to full participation in our democracy is that census participation really is a civil rights issue. When certain communities are missed in the census at disproportionately high levels, we see impacts being felt for decades in those communities as it pertains to resources, the ability to access healthcare, transportation, education, and other key services. And so we have a real opportunity here to ensure that we're setting up our communities for success for the next 10 years. The Census Counts campaign is a collaborative effort among our coalition members, those 200 plus civil and human rights organizations, as well as key partners at the national and local level that are working hand in hand with their communities to plan outreach to communities that are traditionally missed at disproportionately high rates. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Karen, for giving that great overview of some of the challenges that we face. I'll go really quickly here. As it was mentioned, we know that the census doesn't count all groups equally well. Some communities are overcounted, and if you go to the next slide, many communities are undercounted at disproportionately high rates. And so this is a list of some of those. I think one thing that is important and that we are developing in terms of resources and outreach strategies, and one way that libraries can partner with communities, is if you know you've got a high a community of immigrants, Black immigrants, or a large community with single parent households. There are community groups that are working using learnings from message research, using resources specifically designed to target those communities, because we know these communities are not homogenous, and our outreach methods really need to respond to the specific concerns that communities have. And so there's real opportunity to partner with groups that are already doing this work in your community, and I'll talk a bit more about that. If you go to the next slide, our partners at the City University of New York have developed a great tool to identify where hard to count communities are. The Census Bureau also has a tool called the Rome Map, where you can kind of see some of the tracking. One of the reasons this tool is very helpful is not only does it also identify things like contact rates or contact methods that the Census Bureau will be using to reach certain communities that may also be harder to count. It helps identify where those hard to count communities exist in your community and in your state. And then during the census, this map will show kind of what the response rates are in live time, and that will also be on the Rome Map that will be shared by the Census Bureau. As you're kind of designing outreach, often, community members, complete count committees will kind of have a sense of where where outreach should be targeted, and where which libraries kind of can be key to that. The American Library Association actually has this map has an overlay of where libraries are in relation to hard to count communities, and so is a helpful tool as you're messaging to your community of this is how our library is providing outreach to these neighborhoods that are particularly harder to count. This map can be a helpful tool for you. So I encourage folks to take a look at it. If you go to the next slide. So I did want to just touch on a couple of key things about this census, and then I'll talk about some ideas and ways that folks can partner with organizations at the national and local level. One is, well, first off, there are three key ways that this census is different than past censuses, which results in some new opportunities and some challenges in terms of outreach, and really just some considerations that you can think about. One, this is the first high-tech census, which means that people will be invited to participate online. Folks will also be able to participate by phone or by responding to a mailer. We know what that means, and that for many communities raises concerns about internet access, confidentiality, and cybersecurity. There's resources on censuscounts.org about the really strong cybersecurity protections that the Census Bureau is putting in place to protect that internet response portal. And there's also some considerations that libraries can keep in mind if you're going to make some terminals available for participants, for patrons to access the census on terminals at the library. There are just some simple ways that you can keep folks safe. Second is that we know that trust in government is at distrust in government is at an all-time high, and particularly for people of color and immigrants, there's really a toxic environment that exacerbates fears about data confidentiality. Whenever we're talking to communities, we know that this fear comes in different forms. Some communities may be afraid of information being shared with another government enforcement agency or with local police. It's important to reiterate whenever these questions come up that census data is some of the most protected data in all of federal law. And in fact, we as a coalition of trusted messengers are really reinforcing the message that the census is safe for participation, both on the part of cybersecurity and the strong protections that are in place there, and also the legal protections that exist. Partnering with local community partners that may represent the immigrant community or may represent the Black community, it could be a key way to host kind of community events to really respond authentically to those concerns that communities may have. For example, Naleo Educational Fund has a great campaign called Hagastay Kantar that is really providing opportunities to answer those questions that folks may have, particularly in the Hispanic community, to really get at those concerns. The National Urban League and NAACP are providing and responding to those concerns in the Black community. And so partnering with trusted messengers is a really key way to do that. The third thing that we're concerned about is inaccurate information, whether it's intentional or unintentional. So misinformation or disinformation being propagated. The best thing we can do is really proactively get accurate information out there and really build trust across communities that the information they can get from their libraries is accurate, and it's a good place to double check information before they repeat something that may not be accurate that they're hearing. If you can go to the next slide. All of these kind of challenges and opportunities kind of really result in this civil rights crisis of higher rates of undercounting, skewing the census data and impacting representation in government and allocation of resources for the next 10 years. And we don't get a do-over at this. If you go to the next slide. But what this does is create an opportunity of really supporting patrons' participation in the 2020 census. If you go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the Census Counts campaign works at the national, state, and local level to facilitate this participation. There's a network of national organizations that are trusted in communities, providing and developing resources to educate communities about the census. There are webinars, there are fact sheets, that can be customized and rebranded at the local level. Many of these organizations are also developing and translating materials in languages that the Census Bureau will not within their language support plan. So if you're looking for resources, at some level, someone is also probably thinking about it. We also have state coalitions that are being led by organizations organizations in the state and local level. You can go to censuscounts.org and visit our state-by-state map to identify who's leading that census work from a civil rights perspective in my state. And they're building those local coalitions and really driving that work. If you go to the next slide, so what I wanted to do is just take a few kind of quick moments to talk about this timeline and a couple of ways that you can think about engaging with local stakeholders. The way that we're thinking about census outreach really mirrors the Census Bureau's plan and plan of like messaging and engagement. One is for phase one from January to March. We're really focused on education and awareness for folks who haven't heard about the census. They'll hear about it between January and March. The Census Bureau has a huge ad campaign going live, but stakeholder groups and partners and libraries can really think about hosting town halls, educational events, partnering with other community partners that are also doing census outreach, and elevating and providing space to address community concerns or questions that people may have about the census. It's also a great opportunity if your library is going to be doing and providing access to resources or a way to fill out their questionnaire. This is a great opportunity to educate people about your GOTC plan. So putting up posters about when that will be available to folks and reaching out to your partners in your community so that they can also lift that up. In phase two, if you go to the next slide, this is when those forms will actually be going out to households. In this phase, you may see in your community that community groups may be going door to door to reach and encourage folks to return their census forms that they have received in the mail on that fourth mailer, or to participate online or by phone, which is how they'll be invited to participate for many households in those first three mailers. Some folks will receive that paper form in the first mailer. But what we're really focused on is stakeholder groups, is inviting people to participate in this self-response phase. The information is more accurate, and it's a way for communities who are concerned about having someone come to their door, they can take, really take control here and participate in democracy proactively. This is a great opportunity to, if you have a plan to have kiosks or terminals available for folks to participate at the library, having that relationship with those community partners. So if they're going door to door, they can lift up their local library as a resource in this moment. It would be really helpful. And stakeholders will also be hosting events and could partner with libraries on that. If you go to the next slide, so in phase three, this will be after the self-response phase. And one amendment to this slide is I would say this really starts at the beginning of May through the end of July. And we'll really be pushing a complete your census form message. The Census Bureau enumerators will be coming to people's doors. For this reason, we're recommending that community partners do not go door to door so as not to confuse communities. And we'll be really doing a reminder outreach. Some community and stakeholders will be hosting educational events of how to identify a Census Bureau employee that's going door to door and what to do. It's also important to note that individuals and households will still be able to self-respond during this phase. And so that will be if you are interested in kind of continuing the access to do that at your library, that would be an important point as well. So that is me. So I'll turn it back to Karen.
Thank you so much, Beth. Very, very helpful information. I want to now turn the mic over to Cathy and have her talk about some of the ins and outs of partnering with the Census Bureau. And Cathy, if you could do that in maybe about 5 minutes. I've heard you speak before. I know you can do that. That would be great. You might have the mic, the mute might be on your mic. Can you unmute?
Okay, how about now?
I can hear you now.
Perfect. Again, I just want to say thank you so much, Karen, for hosting these webinars on behalf of the American Library Association. And thank you for that presentation, the in-depth information about the census, and also to Beth. She did an excellent job in telling the audience how important this census and responding is. We say $675 billion is at stake annually for communities, for their infrastructure. Our partners are going even higher, that it could be as much as $880 billion annually, and there's only one chance to get this right for the decade. So I'm going to just focus on partnership. It's going to be a short presentation, but it will be filled with a lot of important information. We depend so heavily on trusted voices. Karen was right. Because of what happened earlier in the year and all the angst and indecisiveness about whether a citizenship question was going to be on or off, it's off the questionnaire, but we're hearing that sometimes in some communities the damage has already been done. And so people are already afraid in certain communities, particularly those in our hard to count communities. So the messaging that we're pushing for our trusted partners is to say that the census is important, it's easy, and it absolutely is safe. Next slide, please. In partnering with the Census Bureau, and ALA has been a fantastic partner. They've been engaged for the past, year and a half to 2 years in preparation, dealing directly with the Census Bureau, having come to headquarters, and we are engaged in a regular meetings, et cetera. And so it is through the education portion. That's how local libraries, as default of the ALA being a partner, that libraries, you're going to get so many patrons coming into your libraries, whether they want to answer the census or not, and they're going to have questions, and so we are relying on you. And we have found that there's just a couple of different phases. First, to educate, to tell people about not only the money that will be lost in your community if you don't answer the census questionnaire, and also the congressional representation is determined by the number of people that you have living in your community. And so it's just listening to them and help educate them. And then the next phase is promoting why it should be. Dispel the myths of what is going on. We do not share this information with any government organization, law enforcement, none of that happens. We have a very strong oath that we take. We are fined heavily. And so just trying to make sure that your patrons understand that this is a safe process and there's so many safeguards in place. Activation, when it's time, mid-March, for those that are comfortable in responding online, of course, that's the biggest taxpayers' savings, and we encourage that. You will have the people at your library, they will be able to log on beginning mid-March when we open the online instrument. They will have questions. How do we do it? What does it mean? Can you explain this? Can you explain that? Now, I have not done as good a job in the past webinars as I should have, and I'm trying this time again. So there are things that, of course, as a trusted voice, as a trusted partner, we want you to be able to answer people's questions about the census. We want you, if they need help in reading a sentence or reading one of the questions, absolutely. If they need to know, if they say, this is my answer, I just can't quite see what block fits with that, yes, you can absolutely show them that. What we do not want you to do is give any kind of an impression that you are conducting an enumeration on behalf of the Census Bureau as a volunteer. That is the only line that can't be crossed because the oath that's taken by the Census Bureau employees, and it is critical that you cannot do an enumeration, which means having your laptop in hand, asking the people the questions, putting in their answers for them. So everything else around that, you absolutely.
Cathy, we just lost your audio. Give her 1 more minute to see if we can get her back on. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide that Cathy had wanted to present, which is about census hiring, lots of opportunities. And there was an ALA webinar on census hiring. So if you want more information about that, you can find it on the ALA census webpage. Information about partnering with the Census Bureau. And again, you'll be receiving a copy of the PowerPoint slides. And I'm going to go ahead and have us move on to hearing about how some libraries have been developing services and programs and partnering with organizations to support their census efforts. And I'm going to ask Albert and Kelly to first talk about what's going on in Phoenix. And Kelly and Albert, if you want to make sure your mic's unmuted and go ahead and tell us about what's
yeah, this
happening.
Is Albert. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you just fine.
Yeah.
And Kelly,
Yeah.
do you want to do a quick test of your mic?
Yes, this is Kelly.
We can hear you also, Kelly. Thank you.
Okay, I'll quickly just kick us off and share this with Kelly. But again, thank you to ALA for hosting and allowing us an opportunity to share a program that we came up with to count one of our undercounted categories, which has been children under the age of 5 years old. So in fact, in Arizona, as we started working on stuff in Phoenix specifically in this case, we noticed that in 2010, about 10%, it's a plus or minus, of children under the age of 5 were represented. And so we knew that we had to focus on that. In Phoenix, we have a very high foreign-born population. About 20% of our population is foreign-born. And we also have a very young community. So trying to find creative ways. And really one of the first steps we did was identifying the trusted voices through our complete count committee, as well as trusted spaces such as libraries. We knew that libraries were going to be critical. So I do want to say thank you to Kelly and her team at Phoenix Public Library. They've been great partners to us, and we know that we're going to be working a lot together as we go forward. So really, if we can go to the next slide. What we were working on is trying to find a creative way and really trying to bring awareness as to making sure that families are counting everyone in their household, especially children. So an idea that we came up with as a part of our marketing efforts was thinking about how families love to celebrate things like, for example, right now, a first holiday season with their kid, a first Christmas, or a first day at school, or a first sporting events. So that's really where the idea was kind of born, and we came up with My First Census, and it's been a really big success for us in bringing families together to celebrate something with their children. It's their first time, and trying to find ways of getting families not only knowledgeable about the impacts of the census, which is very important, but also trying to do it as kind of a nice family fun event. So right now we've hosted 2 My First Census events, and we couldn't have kicked it off back in October with our first one with a better partner, that in our central library. And from there I can kind of turn this over to Kelly, and she can talk about all of the creative things that the library did in addition while we had our My First Census event at the public library.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. So the things that we had at our October 5th event, we really tried to get families to engage with the census and to have it be fun and be a part of something that will help their children in the long term. So we had a number scavenger hunt, which we will be continuing in the spring. We're going to gear that back up, where we will hide numbers around in our library and have families track those down and then give a little blurb about the census. We also had counting jars located in different areas where families could guess, how many beans in a jar, how many other, just to kind of get that count theme down in their head. We also have counting story times. We printed out the coloring book that the census.gov provides, and that was a big hit. Moving forward, we will have census worker job fairs, specific computers designated for census only, information kiosks. We're going to be giving a PSA in all of our story times to families so that they are aware of the benefits of the census and how it affects their children. And then we will also be giving that same message in all of our upcoming children's programmings during that time frame. And in addition to that, we're going to have posters, foam core backed posters on easels all around the children's area stating, you know, did you know that the census pays for blah, 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 you know, all of the, we have a kids cafe, which is a free meal we present to children 18 and under. And in that kids cafe room, we'll be highlighting the fact that the reason that we have the money, that we are able to do this, is because of the census.
Thank you, Kelly and Albert. And I do want to also, I'm going to bring up, they have created a video about the My First Census. That's really a great opportunity to see how it unfolded and to actually see some events from the day. So I wanted to make sure everyone knows about that short video. But at this point, I would now like to move over to California. And Jeff, can you tell us what California State University has been doing?
Hi, everybody. Good morning from California. We still are in the morning hours right now. As mentioned, I work at California State University, Monterey Bay. We are one of 23 campuses in California. We make up the largest university system in the nation. And when you add in the UC system, we have a lot of universities in California. Not to mention, California is the most populous state in the nation. And as of this morning, it looked like 39.56 million people are in our state. So making sure that everyone gets counted is very important, particularly to the state of California, as I'm sure it is to the many states that you represent. I'm sure there's people on here from California, so some of this might be very pertinent to you too. California, the state of California, has put in $180 million to make sure that people in California are counted, because as everybody's mentioned, billions of dollars are at stake here. So if you could move to the next slide. So we started early. So as of last summer, we formed a campus-wide action team. So that was made up of myself I'm the science librarian. One of the areas I cover is math and statistics, and math and stats people love the census and numbers. We also had representatives from our service learning department, from our student affairs department, from our housing department, and from international programs. International programs is important, just as an FYI to anybody representing a university out there. Your international students need to be counted. They make up, the census is not a citizen question, it is a person question. So you may have a lot of international students on your campuses who will have no idea what the census is. They will automatically assume it has nothing to do with them. They won't know what it is. So it's really important if you're on a college campus to make sure that there's a lot of good information given to international students, because they do need to be counted and do need to fill it out. So we started this summer, and then early on in the semester, bullet point number 2 there, we partnered with the Service Learning Institute and trained 65 students whose jobs this semester and next semester are to promote the census. We're a Hispanic serving institution. A large majority of our students are bilingual. A lot speak Spanish, but we also have a large Japanese speaking population and many other languages spoke on campus. So we wanted to make sure that our student body was also informed. We also had, so as part of that, that training there, we actually did a few things. It just happens to be that the former US Census Bureau Director, Vincent Baraba, he's actually the only person to ever lead the census twice. Many decades ago, he kicked off our events. We had 2 of our Census Bureau partnership specialists. You all have partnership specialists in your areas. You should find out who they are and reach out to them. We also had a Monterey County Census official, so we're in Monterey County here. We also had nonprofit representatives there who work with the local agricultural farm labor community. So if you're unfamiliar with Monterey, we have everything from the salad bowl of the world, where most of your lettuce is grown in the world, to Pebble Beach is a couple miles away. So we have a very diverse county that we live in. So we wanted this event to really represent different parts of the Monterey Bay region here. And then one thing that many, and there's still time if you're at a university, you still have time before the census. We had I went to the Faculty Academic Senate, and I facilitated and made sure that our Census Bureau partnership specialists were able to talk to the, that day at the Academic Senate, we had about 90 faculty members here. I assume, and I think other people assume, that faculty are part of that trusted voices, that students do trust faculty. And so we made sure that 90 faculty knew the importance of making sure that, you know, what was going on, that students needed to be counted. They're trusted members of the community here. And we wanted to talk to them about international students, for example. Now, if they're in a dormitory, that's a little bit different. They'll be counted along with other people that live in dorms. But for example, here, the university owns a large community here, which is, you know, quote unquote student housing, but it's not really. It has individual mailing addresses. So there's 1,000 different apartments and units right there that need to be counted through the mail. And we'll be actually getting the census cards and forms. And so we wanted to make sure, like, depending on your situation at your universities, you know, are there populations outside of the dorms that are maybe hard to count? Do students, do they tend to live in a certain area that may be hard to count? There's lots of, each individual university has a lot of, you know, different little quibbles and things. So what is it at your university or in your area? What are the things that might be a little difficult to count or see? We also have a lot of DACA students. And so although there is no citizen question, that doesn't mean that students actually know there is no citizenship question. Don't assume that everyone kept up with the news and that everyone knows that there isn't. So we wanted to make sure that all of our DACA students know that it is safe to answer it. There is no citizenship question and that your information is safe. So just be aware of that. Although you may know now that there isn't a citizenship question on there, don't assume that your students do. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what's to come for us? So starting in the spring semester, which for us starts right after Martin Luther King, I'm creating an outreach table. And on average, about 5,000 people walk by this table, this area in our library every day. And it happens to be adjacent to our public access computers. So we wanted it to be conveniently available. So when people see it, and whether that is our DACA students or international students, we wanted them to be able to see it. And it's also adjacent to our reference table. So we wanted to make sure that, like, it was easily accessed, that the librarians will know information. It's next to our outreach table and our public access computer, so anybody can fill out their online census, ask us any questions. Hopefully we can are able to answer for them. And the reason I'm starting in January with it is that although we know that March 12th people can start filling it out, one thing that is a little bit different for us is that April 1st is actually during our spring break. So we want to make sure that students know that although they may be away on spring break, wherever they may go, they really need to be counted where they predominantly would be on a normal day. And so for us, that would be on campus or in this area. So we want to make sure that that's one of the reasons we're starting in January, just to make sure that hopefully people start filling it out right at March 12th, because again, April 1st does lie during our spring break. The other thing we have a problem with, which might happen to you too, is our areas that a lot of students live in. There's about 1 week for the door knockers to actually get to them before they move out of these housing places. You may have students who live in a lot of apartments that have 9-month leases. So we've been working with our Census Bureau partners so that they know the knockers are going to start at our campus before hitting other areas, because there's only about a week to hit them before they permanently move out for the summer and are away. So we want to make sure that, that everyone's counted as possible. And then can you go to the next slide, please? And I know people are wondering, what kind of swag might we give out? And I just gave some examples here. So this is swag. You can see there's a hat, we've got pamphlets, we've got a stress, it's not quite a ball, it's a hashtag number census item there. We have pens, we have buttons, we have backpacks there. They're both in English and Spanish. And now those, I know your people might ask, so no, the library did not pay for these. These were actually provided to us through the county, which is part of the state money that's coming through. So if you are in the state of California, find out who your county person is or your local area rep. I'm sure they have swag of their type, but in a previous webinar as part of, people didn't know what to create. So this is just an example of things that we created that were created in the area. Some of them are very specific. You might see in the middle there, it says Census 2020 Salinas. Salinas is our county seat. It's the largest city in Monterey County. We have one for each particular area. There's general ones for the county, but there's also, for example, one specific to Seaside, Marina, Pacific Grove, Carmel, all the different areas that represent all the little towns around here. So anyways, that's the end of my presentation, but thank you for listening, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you, Jeff. Great ideas, and everybody loves to see the swag that some of the regional offices, particularly in California, are providing. We're going to move on to Gail Borden, and the webinar will likely continue on just past the 1 hour point. So if you can stay on, please do, and apologize we got off to a late start. But Gail Borden Public Library in Illinois has been very active for several months, and Denise is going to talk a little bit about how the library has worked with individuals and groups in their area. So Denise, make sure your mic is unmuted, and okay, I think we can hear you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, ALA, for hosting this very helpful webinar. I've already taken a number of notes, and it's wonderful. We've been working for almost a year already in Elgin, and that's because one of our partners brought it to, one of our funding partners brought it to us early and said, you know, Illinois actually put together, I think it's over $30 million for the census effort here. And so we had a really early notification about the timelines on these grant applications. So that's been wonderful, because it's, again, if you will go to the next slide. We hosted, or we led our census effort here in 2010. And that was that same partner who came to visit earlier, really wanted to take advantage of the library connections and us being such a trusted messenger. So this is some of our 2010. In 2010, we were able to move the count, the self-report count, from 70 to 79%. So we were very proud of that effort, bringing millions of dollars into our community to take care of the people who already live here. And can we go to the next slide? Can we go to the next slide, please? This is the world's largest census form. However, it has not been verified by any important authority. That's what we called it. However, real important to this campaign is that we serve a diverse community. We have language challenges here. So, and the idea that people know about the census is probably not well taken here. So the first thing we have to do is make sure, like for newspapers and social media, that we're not on page 3, that we're on page 1. This particular unfurling of the largest census form was part of that effort in 2010. Next slide, please. And in this year, earlier in August of this year, we unveiled the largest inflatable census tablet. We will, when things get rocking and when people can start to fill out the form, we will actually put a iPad or some kind of tablet in front of it so that you could actually activate and fill out your census form there. But for right now, it's the world's largest, we think, census tablet. But it really, and it says, I love Elgin in 10 different languages, the 10 top spoken languages in U46, which we serve the second largest school district in Illinois. That's Congressman Kristen Morthy there. We had state officials. We had over 350 people who came for our opening. And I think the citizenship question was very difficult and challenging, and it created an atmosphere of mistrust, even more so. What it did here in Elgin is get a lot of people activated early. We did not, look how many people came to our opening. So people are invested here. We understand what we have to lose, what we have to gain. And if you'll go to the next slide. This is just some of the organizations that are already working with us. We have probably already 80 community organizations who are signed in. But of course, as the earlier speaker mentioned, we really heavily rely on that roadmap. And so really making sure that we have the people that we need in the room, the trusted messengers, has been key to us believing that we can do the best job we can in getting people an accurate count in Elgin. Next slide, please. And here, this is just some of the partners that we're working. We're broken into subcommittees here, and it's, as you can read, faith-based. From what we ask from our faith-based, we have a number, that's a pretty large committee for us, but they will be reaching out to a number of churches that are going to ask them to contain the census message in their bulletins. They were also asked for, we would love the pastor to give the message. If not, could we have a speaker in to talk to people in the churches about the importance of filling out the census form. They're also planning a Census Sunday. For business, we have the head of our Chamber of Commerce is leading that committee. And what she readily does is count the number of people, the number of employees that any business may have. And if there's 1,000 people, she just does the multiplication for them. And we are considering it's about $1,500 for people in Illinois, according to the George Washington survey of what each person counted will bring in annual grants. And if you times that times 10 for 10 years, it's significant. And she's had a great deal of success in getting that message. Again, we'll be asking them to have carry the census message in their company bulletins. Media communications, they're working with a number of things, honing messages, making sure that we're getting to the right places. The other thing, and again, anybody who's planning on doing some boosting, we have run up against Facebook telling us it's political messaging. We have registered so that we are registered to complete and boost political ads. That was a 10-day process, I think, to do that. But that's, we think Facebook, when you look at the numbers of our hard to count, Facebook is a really hearty communication channel for getting the message to them. So that's another thing we're doing. Health, we really look at who's in your waiting room. Can we flip the screens over? We have a hearty video program of the trusted messenger closest to the client, providing the message, and hopefully we can play short videos on those screens as people wait. And if people are willing to talk to people in the waiting rooms, we really welcome that. Schools, probably our most important campaign is the schools. Most of the hard to count kids, and again, everyone talks about the undercount for under 5, it was huge. But the schools are trusted messengers. Most of our hard to count kids are going to public schools. The teachers, the principals, the volunteers, these are important messengers to get that census message to land. Our schools last year took in $38 million of federal grant funding. But again, it's not like if we get an undercount, they're not going to have free and reduced lunch for kids that need it. They're just going to take the funds from another program. So we really want our, one of our key messages is taking care of people who already live here. So the schools have their own communication plan. It's 3 pages. It talks about staff awareness. The CEO is giving a weekly message, and Census will be part of that. Communication toolkit that they've created just for the education sector. Parent Weekly, a Blackboard Connect messages, and in the own U46 app, we'll have census messaging as well. Our community and special populations, we work with Centro de Información. It's our #1 stop for new immigrants. We work with our Laotian community. We have a number of groups that serve special populations in here, and we are serving them in the way they tell us they need to be served. And we also have a recruitment people and youth who are not our largest subcommittees, but it's a real valuable to understand and use all the channels that we have available to us. Next slide, please. And as you can see, these are just some of the communication channels that we've already been using. Again, for our kickoff, you'll see our local newspaper. We're on page 1. Reflejos is non-traditional. It's a Spanish language targeted newspaper that we're running ads in. Of course, the communication, and there's just so, and again, our own website, the City of Elgin. And we are co-chair. I'm co-chairing with Laura Valdez of the Assistant City Manager's Office. But the website is on the library's website. And that's where we keep everyone up to date on what's going on, what do we hear, what's the latest, and our resources, and sharing different handouts that are made local. You know, we really do talk about how it impacts people here. Next slide, please. At every meeting, we ask who's not here that needs to be here. Again, those roam maps are so important because you can see who the census data, what the census data says is who are the places where we think we're going to have the most challenges. And it's very helpful to make sure that the organizations and the people serving those folks are part of our effort. Next slide, please. We believe and again, we have some of our own census activities, but a lot of times we want to be where the people are. So what we have is this census timeline. And if you'll note, I don't know if you can see how small that is, but that is other people's events. We want to be where other people are already gathering. So a lot of times we've had several events lately where it's something at the U46 where we will have a table giving out information. At library programs, we will be often here over the break. We will have tables in our lobbies here to take advantage of the library attendance, but we really want to be where people are already. So any festivals, we will be there with the census. Next slide, please. And what we do have grant money from the state of Illinois and from private donors. What we are going to be buying or have bought, of course we have the largest inflatable tablet. We will be buying mobile tablets and laptops, and those are to take out if, of course the library will be a significant resource in filling out the online census. However, we want to be able to support other people at other places as they fill out the census. People, we'll be paying for people. We already have an additional person that is working with our immigrant population, and she's been wonderful. We will also have someone at the last 2 months that will be February, March, in our busy times in the library, greeting people and a person who also speaks Spanish, letting them know that the census is safe, simple, and significant. This is 3 S's that our wonderful partnership, Teresa Lee, our census partnership specialist, gave us those 3 S's, and so we're moving a lot of our messaging to that since they're so easy to remember. Of course, we've got money in for videographer, radio, cable, and Facebook boosting. Again, remember, you may have a little difficulty boosting census, so you might have to register early. Please go on. And training. We've had 3 trainings here so far, and some of them are various lengths. Sometimes we'll have a long one, sometimes we just have an overview. In February, where our librarians have asked for that, we will have the census in to talk about what is the legally appropriate way to assist people in the census. So I do think the voice, it's one thing for me to say, this is what the census person said to me. It's another thing to hear right from a census employee. So we will have a census employee come in February to provide that training to a number of volunteers, is what's appropriate when you are assisting someone. And you don't have to know everything. That's one thing that we talk about is, if, we had a hotline in 2010, and that was really wonderful because there's some really complex questions that will come up, and using that hotline number was really appropriate and helpful. What we're hearing for implement, of course, we can't wait to go, but we had heard in a recent meeting, and again, I hope someone from the census will verify that, another person from that, but we had a census partnership specialist tell us recently that the portal will open on March 26th. So making sure that our library is in a position to provide adequate access when they open that portal. And implement is for everyone. Again, we will execute. We're really doing a lot with education right now, but we will be, full bore implement in February of next year. Also, our Democratic primary is against, it will be in the same time frame as the census, so making sure we get out a little early. So our media buys aren't running right against the Democratic primary. It's something we're thinking about as well. Next slide, please. And this is just a show, this is just a visual showing how many partners were involved in 2010, and this is how we've actually got more partners in 2020. And next slide, please. And this is, we had over 1 million people come to Gail Borden Public Library programs in last fiscal year. What is wonderful about census work is it keeps on giving back. You're gonna meet new people. I can't recommend it more highly. It helps everyone in the community. A lot of people get to know each other, and it makes everybody more effective working in this public sector, in this community sector. I can't tell you how much new partnerships, new people, new relationships has done as a value to the library and to the community, and that it works in all directions. So I can't recommend it more highly. And the last slide, please. And this is just one of our first testimonial videos is a young Hispanic American mom and her 2 kids talking about why she's going to be counted. And we have this both in English and Spanish. We will have a number of trusted messengers, saying the very same thing, but saying it from their sector. So thank you very much. I wish you all well in the census work. It's really wonderful work, and I hope if there's some questions, I'll be hanging around it as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. As you can tell from all 3 of the examples we gave, there is, there is much that is happening in terms of libraries partnering and initiating outreach efforts. And as you saw, we've got both the video from the City of Phoenix and Phoenix Public Library, as well as the video that just started playing from Elgin, Gail Borden Public Library District, and you should make sure to view those. Even though we are a little bit over the time, I want to take just about 5 minutes to answer some questions. A couple of questions have come in. I'm going to move on to the next slide so that if we don't get to your question, you know who to contact, either Lara Clark, Gavin Baker, or myself, to get some more information and to reiterate the ALA website that's particularly has a lot of resources that you should find useful. One question that came in that I want to address had to do with, why does a state like California have lots of funds dedicated towards the census efforts, and some other states haven't allocated any or much funding at all. And it's my understanding that it's pretty much a state-by-state decision. And if anybody else, I don't know if Gavin, if you can type in there, my understanding is pretty much a state-by-state decision, and there are quite a few differences. Also, a question came up in terms of does every Census Bureau office have swag? And again, I think this varies by the region and by the state itself in terms of whether or not the Census Bureau is creating swag that you can use. I do want to note that the Census Bureau website has multiple downloadable materials, social media, posters, flyers, different kinds of messaging and marketing that you can freely download and use, and it's available in office in languages other than English as well. A couple of questions came up about college students and where they are counted. We are going to have a tip sheet coming out just within the next few weeks that provides the overview, but the idea is that where an individual resides most of the time, or where he or she is residing on April 1st, is the key defining. So even if a student is registered to vote at their home address in one state, but they're going to college in another, it would be where they are residing, which is where they are counted. Let's see if there are any other questions that come in, just for about 2 or 3 minutes. I know there's some others. Somebody asked early on when the map of hard to count communities came up that Beth showed us, there was different kind of intensities of color. Those, the color variation has to do with the, I don't know if it's literally a per capita, but it's the number of individuals that, I believe it's the number of individuals that are in hard to count populations that reside in those areas. Final day for self-response. That's a good question. I'm not sure. We'll have to look that up. That may be on the Census Bureau website. Again, I apologize that we got off to a late start, but hopefully you appreciate you kind of hanging in here to listen to the entire webinar. And again, we will be sending you a link to the recording as well as all the PowerPoint slides. And I will go back through the chat and capture some of the questions where we can easily provide kind of short responses or link you to resources that will be useful. Okay, again, thank you. And I want to thank the presenters for their putting together lots of information to present in a short amount of time. And I apologize that we seem to have lost Cathy in the audio, but we will make sure you get the information that was she had wanted to present. Thank you. And Lauren, I think we can go ahead and conclude the webinar.
Awesome. I'm going to stop the recording now.